I'm going to start with you, Mary. I think that when people think about transgenderism, they think a lot about, especially the medical issues. We're seeing a rash of states start to pass various laws and restrict the medical aspect of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries to children. But perhaps the most other consequential areas in our society is the law and in the schools. And so you saw me making air quotes up there with gender identity. When did you first notice how gender identity ideology was shaping the law? And what happens, whether it's non-discrimination statutes or really any part of public policy or the law, when you insert that as a category of personhood, what does that do to the law? And on the school front, could you explain how children are being indoctrinated in school settings, in educational settings in that arena, that they have, and they possess this gender identity apart from their sex, despite there being no brain scan or blood test or genetic marker indicating that that's actually a thing?
Great, thanks. Well, thank you all for being here. So just for a little bit of context before I dive into some of the legal points, you have to realize that this is a global movement. And so when I first started researching this over a decade ago, I was looking at it on a global scale and starting to see all the changes that were in Europe as well as here. But it's shaping language, it's shaping law, it's shaping healthcare, it's shaping our relationships. Let me give you a little story. In 1996, there was a small band of they called themselves transsexual activists who met in Houston and wrote something that they called the International Bill of Gender Rights. And it said that every person has a right to self-define an identity, to modify their body however they want, to be able to form families, have sexual relationships according to their desire, and acquire children. And nobody cared. It was a document that fizzled, got no attention. That was 1996. Fast forward to today. Here we have those very same beliefs that are now Biden administration policy. And make no mistake, this is a belief system. It's a belief about who we are as human beings. So we might say, well, how did that happen? Well, two things happened. One, those who believed in that ideology captured the cultural institutions, media, entertainment, schools, law in many respects, healthcare. But it also took the decline of religion, because all of a sudden you had a culture that was still looking for meaning, but didn't have an answer, and was much more willing to believe. So now we're facing a situation where a basic concept like sex, which we know what it is, the difference between male and female, it's a biological term, that sex in the law is being redefined to mean gender identity. Gender identity is a feeling. It's completely subjective. Can't test for it, can't prove it. It's got to be declared. And so when you make that a legal category, what you're doing is you are ensuring that women, in particular, are going to lose all those rights that we got with sex discrimination laws, or laws protecting against sex discrimination. So it's a danger to women, as you'll hear, but it's also conditioning, because this is pushed through the education system. It's conditioning people to believe something that is fundamentally incompatible with Christian beliefs. So this was kind of a long time coming, but it is having a profound impact.
Indeed it is, and I think when you're forming the minds of the next generation to believe this as though it is objectively true, just give that some time, and the consequences are indeed pretty dire. A few years ago, Theresa Farnan, a co-author, you released a book, as I said when I introduced you, called Get Out Now, in which you explained that parents must withdraw their children from public school before it's too late. And that was a few years ago. What has changed since then? And what would you say to those who, for whatever reason, have decided to keep their children in public school? How should they resist this ideology to protect their children from being indoctrinated, or even worse, being referred by the guidance counselor to the local gender clinic, which I've also heard?
Yeah. So when we wrote that book, we were looking at what was happening in the Obama administration, and we were finding a lot of the things that have now come out under COVID, et cetera, where parents are realizing that schools were socially transitioning their kids and not telling them, and that there was sort of a school to clinic pipeline where trainers from the clinics would come in and train the teachers, so the teachers would know what to look for that might indicate a kid had gender issues, and then they know where to refer them. So we saw this under the Obama administration, and our conclusion was that this was, you want to work for change, but you're not going to get change within our kids' school lifetime. In other words, for an individual child, if you look at them sitting in a class, are you going to be able to change the system in order to change their experience? Or are you going to see what we see now, where there are bright spots, but things have gotten worse in many respects? Why? Because those who are pushing this are openly introducing it at younger and younger ages, pre-K, kindergarten, telling kids literally, you get to decide if you're a boy or a girl. But perhaps more importantly, on a conceptual level, they're teaching children that their feelings determine reality, which as parents, we know that's a dangerous thing to do. But it's not only taught, it's reinforced. So the bright spots I see are these. We have more parents than ever who have kind of awakened as to what's going on in the schools. You have some shift in school boards, certainly here in Texas. We saw some of that. We see legislators being emboldened, trying to put in laws that are going to restrict the teaching of sexual orientation, gender identity, or at least allow parents to have a say in that. That's all good news. But the bad news is this. It's still a top-down and bottom-up process. Top-down, you've got all of the educational establishment, the School Boards Association, the Teachers Associations, the Biden administration, the Education Department, pushing this and pushing it relentlessly, reinterpreting Title IX to say that the sex discrimination provision means you can't discriminate on the basis of gender identity. So there may be some good things happening here in Texas in terms of the legislature, but you have all this pressure coming down from the top that's saying to principals, to teachers, to the good people who are in there trying to do a good job, you're going to get sued if you don't do it our way. And then you have the bottom-up pressure. We've had more than a decade of activist teachers coming out of schools of education where they have been promoting this for over a decade. So you have a different cohort of teachers who are utterly convinced that this is the truth of the person. The person gets to decide who they are, regardless of the truth of their body. And so you've got that bottom-up pressure. And then you have the catalyst of social media. And it is, even in the best of school situations, the kids are bringing what they see on social media, which is 100% toxic, just permeated with gender ideology, and creating this peer culture that makes it very, very difficult for someone not just to speak the truth, but not be bullied for believing the truth. So you've got all of those pressures. And which, again, as I look at it, and I've got more of a long-term perspective because I've been watching this, it's really hard to see how these changes are going to make a difference for a child who's in there right now, because it's coming at them. And we adults don't like to be in that position, right, where someone's going to call us a bigot if we don't believe the right thing. But here's the thing. Some people can't leave. Some people are in the public schools. Their kids are there. So what do? 3 Ps. Be proactive. You have to build your relationship with your kids. You have to teach them the truth. God created us male and female. And just be upfront, doubling down. It's never enough. Be proactive, but be protective. That means you have to address gender ideology. You have to tell them. There are people, they may be misguided, mistaken. You don't have to call them bad people. But they believe something that's really not true. And it's not only not true, it's really, really harmful. And so they need to know that. And then you need to be protective in terms of looking at the influences. Get them off social media, look at their friend groups, see which direction they're going in, and have the courage to act. The 3rd P is pray, because nobody loves your kids like you do. And if you're not praying for them, who is? So God's in charge, but right now, this is going to take a long time to unwind. So
we're going to do some praying later.